The hotel conference room in Denver still smelled faintly of coffee and the cheap carpet cleaner they must have used earlier that morning. I remember the way the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, a soft electric hum matching the rhythm of my pulse as I rehearsed lines from my pitch. My laptop screen glowed with graphs, projections, and bullet points that had consumed the last 3 months of my life. Every step I took across the floor was an effort to keep my nerves steady. This meeting was supposed to be the one that launched my career into something tangible, something I could finally point to as mine. Then my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen, expecting a harmless text or calendar reminder, but it was Mom. My mother wasn't the type to call casually, especially not in the middle of the day when she knew I'd be working. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, before answering. The sound of her voice hit me like ice water. Broken sobs, words tumbling out in fragments, each syllable laced with panic. "Sweetheart, it's Grandpa. He had a stroke. You need to come home now." In that moment, the pitch deck, the room, the carefully planned presentation, all of it fell away. My chest tightened, and I felt as if the floor beneath me had vanished. Grandpa James, the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who'd sat through my endless childhood recitals with proud applause, who carried himself with a steady dignity that made me believe he was unshakable, was suddenly fragile, mortal, slipping away. I barely remembered how I packed or even how I got to the airport. What I do remember is the sensation of tears streaking down my cheeks as I typed out frantic emails to cancel the meeting, apologizing to investors I might never get another chance to impress. None of it mattered. All I could see in my mind was Grandpa in a hospital bed, machines beeping, nurses rushing. The flight felt endless, though in truth it was only a couple of hours. I sat in the middle seat, arms folded tightly across my chest, as though holding myself together would prevent me from breaking apart. The roar of the engines seemed distant compared to the sound of my own thoughts. I replayed memories, each one tinged with guilt. I hadn't visited him in weeks. Work had been my excuse. Deadlines, meetings, pitches. Now all I could think was, what if I don't get another chance? What if the last conversation we had was truly the last? Every bump of turbulence made me clench my fists harder, as though the plane itself was mocking my helplessness. I stared out the window at the clouds, each one blindingly white against the blue, and wished desperately that I could turn back time. When the wheels finally touched the runway, I'd bolted from my seat the moment the seatbelt light went off. The cab ride to the hospital blurred past in streaks of traffic and stoplights, my heart hammering against my ribs with each passing block. I rehearsed what I'd say to him. "I'm here now. I'm sorry. I love you." Words that felt too small for the weight of the fear in my chest. But the moment I stepped inside the hospital lobby, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere wasn't tense. Nurses moved at a normal pace, conversations carried on in measured tones, and no one looked like they were responding to a life or death emergency. Confusion tangled with my relief as I rushed toward the room number I'd been given. And then, there he was, Grandpa James, sitting upright in bed, a warm smile breaking across his weathered face as he teased one of the nurses. His hands weren't trembling, his eyes weren't vacant. He looked fine, alive, whole. Relief flooded through me so quickly that my knees nearly gave out. I crossed the room in 2 steps, wrapping my arms around him, my cheek pressing against the familiar fabric of his flannel shirt. Tears spilled again, but this time they were born of gratitude rather than dread. "I'm fine, kiddo," he chuckled, patting my shoulder with a reassuring firmness. Just a little dizzy spell. Nothing to lose your mind over. I pulled back, searching his face. He was steady, his color normal, his breathing strong. The terror that had consumed me on the flight now felt almost foolish, but not entirely. The memory of my mother's voice still rang in my ears, raw and frantic, as though she had been seconds from collapse herself. That was when the ember sparked inside me. A suspicion, faint but insistent. Why had Mom made it sound so catastrophic? Why had she let me believe he was at death's door? I wanted to be relieved, to let the joy of seeing him alive erase everything else. But I couldn't. The unease lingered, threading its way through my relief like a crack in glass. As Grandpa reached for his cup of water, still smiling, still strong, I forced myself to smile back. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something didn't add up. And that quiet ember of doubt, small though it was, began to burn. Dad's voice was low, strained, as though forcing the words out cost him more strength than he had left. His hand clamped down on my arm, pulling me away from Grandpa's hospital room, away from the false comfort of laughter and the illusion that everything was fine. His face was ashen, his lips tight, and when he finally spoke, the sentence cracked the fragile relief I'd been clinging to. There's something worse. The company account, $4.2 million. It's gone. At first, I thought I'd misheard. My brain tried to rearrange the syllables into something else, something less devastating. 4.2 million? Gone? It didn't fit. It couldn't. My heart, still steady from the sight of Grandpa sitting upright, jolted painfully, as though the floor beneath me had given way again. Harrison Supply Co. wasn't just a business. It was the marrow of our family, the structure that had held us together for 3 generations. I grew up watching Grandpa unlock the office doors at dawn, his calloused hands gripping the keys like sacred objects. I remembered him explaining supply contracts at the kitchen table, the way his eyes lit when he talked about building something that outlasted him. 4.2 million wasn't just a number. It was a lifetime of sacrifice, of late nights, and unbroken promises. It was payroll for our workers, trust built with suppliers, the very lifeline that kept us alive. I stared at Dad, waiting for him to say it was a banking error, a technical glitch, something fixable. But his eyes told the truth before his mouth did. He couldn't even meet my days. Who could have accessed it? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Who had clearance? The silence that followed was suffocating. I knew the answer before he gave it. The way his shoulders sagged, the way his throat bobbed as he swallowed, it all pointed in one impossible direction. Mom. The word lodged in my chest like shrapnel. My own mother. The same woman who used to braid my hair before school, who packed lunches with little handwritten notes, who lectured me about honesty and the importance of family. She had taken Grandpa's stroke and twisted it into a diversion, playing my panic like a violin so she could move freely behind the curtain. While I sat on that plane, staring out at clouds and praying he'd survive, she had been wiring money into shell accounts, drafting false invoices, creating a labyrinth of deceit. I felt nauseous. My stomach lurched as though I'd swallowed poison. My mind tried to reject the thought, to shove it back out. But the truth had already taken root. This wasn't just theft. It was betrayal at the deepest level. Blood against blood. I wanted to scream at Dad, demand that he prove me wrong. But the evidence was too solid. Transaction trails, account access, signatures, all leading back to her. My mother, the person who taught me that family was sacred, had gutted us from the inside. Later that evening, I confronted her. I can still see the way she looked at me, her eyes dry, calculating, not the least bit ashamed. She didn't deny it. Instead, she delivered her excuse like it was some twisted gift. I had no choice. You wouldn't understand. No choice. The words echoed in my skull. What kind of mother fakes a medical emergency, rips $4 million from her family's veins, and then shrugs it off as necessity? I wanted to shake her, to scream, explain it to me. Make me understand how greed replaces loyalty, how betrayal feels justified. But all she gave me was a dismissive glance, as though my pain was an inconvenience she didn't have time for. That night, I sat alone in the darkened living room, the silence pressing against me like a physical weight. The betrayal burned hot, spreading through every vein, every nerve ending. Anger wasn't enough of a word. It was something rawer, sharper, something that stripped away any illusion of safety I had left. I tried to reconcile the woman who tucked me in at night with the thief who dismantled our family's future. But the two images refused to merge. This wasn't just embezzlement. It wasn't some faceless fraud. It was treason against her own blood. She had looked into the heart of the family that trusted her most and carved it open, leaving nothing but hollow echoes behind. And the cruelest part, the part that haunts me even now, was the way she delivered that single line, so cold, so detached. You wouldn't understand. She was right. I didn't. I couldn't. And in that moment, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to. The days that followed felt like stepping into a slow-moving nightmare. One where reality unraveled in fragments, and every phone call, every email, every knock at the door carried another piece of bad news. 4.2 million. The figure became a curse, a number I couldn't scrub from my mind. It wasn't just digits on a screen. It was the sound of employees murmuring behind closed doors, their voices laced with uncertainty. It was the sharp tone of suppliers demanding answers, their trust in Harrison Supply Co., slipping through my fingers like sand. It was the hollow look in Dad's eyes, a look that aged him a decade in the span of a week. The walls of the house seemed to absorb the tension. Conversations were clipped, meals eaten in silence. The air was heavy with something unspoken. Betrayal had made its home among us, and no one knew how to drive it out. I watched Dad pace the living room late into the night, his shoulders slumped, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to sue the creditors who no longer believed in promises. Once proud, once steady, he was now a man unraveling, every line on his face deepened by the weight of failure that wasn't even his. And then there was Mom. Her justifications landed like knives. I was securing my future, she said, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. I've given everything to this family and this company. I deserved something back. Deserved. The word stung worse than the theft itself. She framed her betrayal as justice, as if siphoning away the blood of the business and the sweat of its workers was some form of compensation. Her logic was a maze that twisted itself into righteousness, but no matter how she dressed it, I saw it for what it was. Greed wrapped in the flimsy costume of entitlement. I wanted to believe that somewhere in her was regret, that the woman who had once bandaged my scraped knees and kissed my forehead goodnight still existed. But when I searched her eyes, all I found was a hard gleam, a conviction that chilled me more than the theft itself. She didn't see the collapse she triggered, the layoffs looming over loyal employees, the suppliers ready to sever ties, the risk of losing Grandpa's legacy. No, she saw only herself, finally grasping what she thought was owed. The rage that burned inside me was unlike anything I'd felt before. It wasn't just anger at the money. It was fury at the erosion of trust, at the theft of dignity. Mom hadn't only stolen from a company account. She'd stolen the sense of security from families who depended on their paychecks, stolen the pride Grandpa carried every time he walked into the office he built from scratch, stolen the very soul of what Harrison Supply Co. represented. Late one evening, when the house was cloaked in silence, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light flickered slightly, casting shadows that stretched across the wood. In front of me lay my notebook, the company seal embossed on the cover, a symbol of what once was, and of what I feared might never be again. I traced my fingers over that seal, remembering Grandpa's words as if he were sitting across from me. Legacies aren't inherited, they're protected. He'd said it to me when I was a teenager. When I asked why he spent so many hours at work instead of retiring early, he told me then that a legacy wasn't a gift passed down like furniture or jewelry. It was a living thing, fragile and enduring only if defended. His voice echoed in my mind now, louder than the whispers of employees or the ringing of unanswered phones. It rose above the excuses Mom fed us, above Dad's exhausted sighs, above the suffocating silence that settled over our home. I realized then that the legacy wasn't gone. Not yet. 4.2 million had vanished, yes, but what it stood for could still be salvaged. If Mom wanted to reduce the company to ashes in her pursuit of securing her future, then I would walk through those ashes and rebuild it with my own hands. That decision didn't come with triumph or relief. It came with a steady, smoldering resolve that pressed itself into my bones. I felt the weight of it as I sat at that table, the house creaking softly in the night, the faint sound of Dad's restless pacing upstairs. My anger didn't dissipate. It hardened into something sharper, something more enduring. I wasn't just the daughter of a thief, or the granddaughter of a man whose life's work had been gutted. I was the heir to a promise, the one Grandpa had etched into me long before this crisis. And in that moment I knew, if she wanted to burn everything down, I would be the one to rise from the fire, not as a victim, but as the protector of what she had tried to destroy. The decision to fight back didn't ignite with fire and spectacle. It began with quiet hours bent over ledgers, digital records, and dusty filing cabinets that smelled of paper and ink. I moved like a shadow through the office and the house, piecing together fragments my mother thought she had buried too deep. Wire transfers, each one carefully spaced to avoid suspicion, told the story in stereo numbers. Signatures, slightly off in their angles and pressure, betrayed the hand that had forged them. Corporate records, doctored to reflect phantom expenses, sat like silent confessions waiting for someone who cared enough to notice. I cared. More than that, I was furious. Fury sharpened my eyes, made me see the threads she thought invisible. Where she saw misdirection, I saw patterns. Where she assumed loyalty would blind us, I let betrayal open mine wider than ever before. Each document I uncovered was a blade, cutting through the last remnants of the childlike trust I once had for her. When the evidence stacked high enough to crush denial, I made the call she never imagined I would. The FBI's white-collar crimes unit didn't answer with sympathy or shock. They answered with procedure. Calm, steady voices guided me through next steps. They didn't coddle me. They treated me like a partner, someone who had stepped into the arena willingly, and I had. The morning we walked into Harrison Supply Co., I felt the weight of generations pressing down on my shoulders. The air in the lobby was thick with the hum of printers, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of employees who had no idea what was about to descend on them. I wore a blazer that felt too stiff, shoes that clicked too loudly on the polished floor, but my heart beat with a rhythm steadier than I expected. The agents flanked me, their presence silent but undeniable. Every eye in the building turned as we entered, curiosity at first, then confusion, then dawning fear. The kind of fear that comes when authority walks in uninvited. I didn't hesitate. My voice carried across the marble lobby, louder than I'd ever heard it before. This company is under federal investigation. Effective immediately. I am assuming control as acting CEO. For a moment, the world froze. I could hear the tick of the lobby clock, the hiss of the espresso machine in the break room, even the shallow breaths of the receptionist clutching her pen like a lifeline. Then chaos stirred, gasps, whispered questions, eyes darting to one another in disbelief. And then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, my mother's heels striking the floor like a gavel. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale but defiant. For a heartbeat, I almost faltered. This was my mother, after all. The woman who had raised me, who once brushed the hair out of my eyes when I cried. But then the memory of $4.2 million stolen dollars surged back, and I stood taller. The agents moved swiftly, their words crisp and professional. She resisted at first, her voice rising in shrill protest, claiming injustice, betrayal, anything that might stick. But the cuffs clicked shut all the same, metal biting into wrists that once wore delicate bracelets. Her eyes locked on mine, a twisted mixture of fury and fear contorting her features. For just a second, I felt the echo of pity stir in my chest, but it vanished just as quickly. She had chosen this path, and sympathy was a currency I could no longer afford to spend on her. As they led her away, the staff stood in stunned silence. Some looked at me with suspicion, others with something like hope, but all of them waited. It was in that silence that I realized the enormity of what I had just done. Harrison Supply Co. was mine to steer now. Sink or survive, the helm was in my hands. The days that followed were brutal. Fear gnawed at the corners of the office. Employees whispered in clusters, wondering if their jobs would vanish next, if the company itself was circling the drain. Clients called with weary voices, asking if they should pull their contracts, their investments, their trust. Every meeting felt like a test I hadn't studied for, every decision like walking a tightrope over fire. But in that crucible, something shifted. I chose transparency, not as a buzzword, but as a lifeline. I opened the books, line by line, number by number. No more shadows, no more hidden hands. Every dollar was tracked, every invoice vetted, every contract explained not just to me, but to the people who had given their lives to this company. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. Suspicion gave way to cautious belief. Fear eased into tentative stability. And for the first time in its history, Harrison Supply Co. wasn't ruled by manipulation, secrecy, or fear. It was led by clarity. What my mother had stolen in money, I would restore in trust. What she had shattered in dignity, I would rebuild in truth. And though the scars she left behind would never vanish, I vowed that the company, our legacy, would rise stronger, cleaner, and brighter than it had ever been under her shadow. A year is not a long time in the life of a company, but in mine, it felt like a lifetime had passed. 12 months ago, Harrison Supply Co. stood on the brink of collapse, our reputation frayed, our trust shattered, our very future dangling by a thread. Now, The same hallways that once echoed with whispers of doubt buzzed with a new energy. An energy of survival turned into triumph. Clients who had pulled back during the investigation slowly returned, their cautious handshakes becoming firm commitments once they saw we had not only survived the storm, but rebuilt stronger. The books told the story plain as day: profit, quarter over quarter. Not astronomical at first, but steady, reliable, and real. For every invoice cleared, every contract honored, every promise kept, the company's spine straightened a little more. I walked those glass corridors differently now. I used to move through them as a daughter, a granddaughter, a girl shadowed by legacies she wasn't sure she could uphold. Now, I walked as a leader, every footstep echoing not just authority, but purpose. The employees, once wary, their eyes darting to me as if waiting for cracks to show, now greeted me with nods, smiles, even pride. Their belief wasn't handed to me. I had earned it in late nights, in hard choices, in the relentless insistence that every voice in this building mattered. Grandpa noticed. One quiet afternoon, we sat together in his study, the late sun slanting through the blinds, casting stripes of light across his face. His hands, once so steady, trembled slightly as he held his tea. His eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion when he said, "You didn't just save the company, Claire. You saved the family name." Those words struck deeper than I expected. For all the reports I had signed, for all the board meetings I had steered, nothing carried the weight of that sentence. It wasn't about numbers. It was about legacy, about honor restored. His approval wasn't a medal I sought, but a truth I needed. A reminder that the sacrifices hadn't been in vain. But the triumph wasn't without shadows. My mother's absence lingered like a ghost. She pled guilty, the evidence undeniable, and though the world saw it as justice, I carried it as something heavier. She was still my mother, the woman who raised me, who once kissed my scraped knees and whispered bedtime stories. Wrestling with that contradiction became its own quiet battle. I despised what she had done, yet a part of me mourned who she had been, or who I thought she was. In court, her face had been unreadable, her posture rigid as the charges were read. Fury, fear, denial. They had all passed over her expression in waves, but never regret. Watching her there, chained not just by cuffs but by choices, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I endured it, because her collapse wasn't just her own. It left fractures in me too. And yet, in a cruel way, her betrayal carved the space for me to rise. Without her implosion, I might never have found the courage to step fully into the role I had been circling all along. At 25, I became CEO of a company most said I was too young to lead. Age was their measuring stick, but resilience became mine. I wasn't naive anymore. I had seen greed wear the mask of family. I had felt the sting of betrayal close enough to scar. And still I stood. That was my qualification. Every time I walked through those glass doors, the reflection staring back at me wasn't just my own. It was the sum of everything I had endured. The betrayal didn't define me, it propelled me. The whispers that once questioned my capability had quieted, replaced by voices that trusted me to guide them forward. Some mornings, when the office lights flicker on and the hum of industry fills the air, I pause to let it sink in. This place, once nearly gutted, now thrives under clarity, honesty, and determination. Betrayal left scars, but those scars became the blueprint for something better. And so, I remind myself with every step, every decision, every signature, it's not the treachery that marks us, it's what we build after. That truth, etched into me by fire and ash, is the legacy I will carry forward.